Bryan Broaddus, former NFL scout on 105.3 The Fan, and has all sorts of podcasts with the Cowboys and does an incredible job. Has been major part of many drafts when he was in the NFL. Great to have you, Bryan. Really, really is. Thanks for your time. If I was to say these are starting positions the Cowboys must come out of the weekend with, what would you say those must be?
Well, it's good to be with you, Smokey, as always. The thing I think that the Cowboys, it's really open to a lot of different avenues. When you start to talk about a team that struggled the way that they did, there is a lot of holes on this team. I think that you would have to start with, I don't think they particularly have a running back on this roster right now that if they had to go and start a game, we could talk about Williams and others there, but I don't think they have somebody that they could honestly go and put out there right now and win a game. I think it would be very difficult for them. They have to figure out what's going on at corner right now. I think that's another area where they've probably going to have to look at that through the draft. Maybe we'll see after the draft, post-draft, if there's somebody out there that they want to sign, but that's a little bit of a mess right now with what's going on with the injuries and some of the losses they've had. I think at one technique, they would probably tell you right now that, Mozzie Smith has gotten better, but he's nowhere near where they need, to be paired with Oso Digizua. So that would be an area of concern for me, for sure. So you wide receiver, running back, thinking about what's going on at right guard would be a concern for me. One technique, defensive tackle, and potentially corner. I think these are all areas that would be something that I think that they would look at just to try and fill the best as they can.
Had they retained Rico Dowdle, would that change your mind on when they took a running back in this draft?
I think it would make it a little bit different for me, Smokey. I think that they would. To me, I think that you could go a little bit later in this draft. I don't, in where I'm looking at this draft, and it's actually very deep at the running back position. Where I'm looking at it right now is, and I'm just going to try and break it down as simple as possible, to go from very good to just good. If they waited, if they have Rico Dowdle, I think they could have waited until day 3 to pair somebody up with him. I just think right now they need to think about whether, and they're likely not going to pick one in the first round, but second round, third round, I think those are that would be the area that I would try and go ahead and grab this running back. But to your point, if Rico was here, I think you could wait to day 3. Without him, I think you're going to have to try and get that within the first 2 days.
Will McClay and Jerry and Steven, the scouts, you've been in that business of building a roster and getting ready for a draft and whatever else. How much influence does a first-year coach like Schottenheimer have, if at all?
Well, I'll tell you what, though, you're absolutely right about coaches being involved with, in this process. Bryan has talked about he wants the scouts to do their jobs, and I could appreciate that. It reminds me very much of when Bill Parcells came in with us, and Bill did not know the scouts. He didn't have a background of the scouts that were working for the Cowboys at the time. So he really sat back. He took his coaches out of the room. He sat back and kind of observed, made some opinions about where he think the board should be. And so there was those discussions. And then I think that Brian Schottenheimer's going to do the same thing. I know Jerry's encouraging the scouts to have, the coaches to have an opinion on this. Mike McCarthy, I worked in Green Bay. Mike McCarthy, I worked with Ted Thompson there, who was a general manager for years. Teddy picked the players for Mike McCarthy. Mike didn't have a whole heck of a lot to say. But when Mike came to Dallas, he had a big say. Dave Campo had a big say. Every coach that I'd been with and worked with there had a say in what was going on in that draft. So Brian Schottenheimer will have an influence, but it's also Will's very good at managing the Joneses, managing the coaches, and then managing the scouts, and then kind of coming to that opinion. They like to have a consensus in their room. And I think that Brian Schottenheimer, if it's all said and done, he'll have a big opinion. Jerry will encourage him, and Jerry Jones will ultimately be the tiebreaker if they do have any type of discussion where it needs to be done.
It's in the war room. Who actually has an opinion in the war room?
Well, usually what happens is when they build their boards, this is all done the weeks before the draft, and so then you have what's the stack and then the actual board. So a lot of the discussions and a lot of the debates will happen. Take care of that. You don't want to be on the clock and all of a sudden having to deal with the story about Johnny Manziel being on the board. When they lose Ryan Shazier on their stack, they're going to take the linebacker Ryan Shazier. He's gone. Zach Martin's the next player. Jerry says Johnny Manziel's on that board. Everybody's quiet in the room. Finally, Steven steps up. Hey, we got Zach Martin here, Jerry. Jason Garrett steps up. Everybody at that point then kind of has their opinion. I think Jerry does encourage the dialogue. I think he does he encourages discussion. But man, you just want to make sure that all that is done before the draft. You don't want any massive just people losing their minds while you're on the clock. That's just not a very productive way of doing things. But there's discussion in that room.
There's a 365-day-a-year calendar for getting the next level of what you're going to have to fill a roster and the decisions and whatever. And yeah, there's the season. Is this Christmas Day for scouts and personnel people, the weekend itself, or how do you describe it as a guy who's been there and been a part of a franchise? What is today like for a franchise?
It's actually really, really exciting. I would say this is a great gig. It would be a great gig if you didn't have to play games. If you just would, we could scout players and we could have a draft and like on paper, okay, you had the best draft, so we're done. Let's do the cycle again. But yeah, this is it's hope. It's what brings you that. It brings you hope when you have a poor season, or if you're the Philadelphia Eagles, your team is not going to be the same that won the Super Bowl. It gives you hope that like, okay, we have a base that we can work with, but they're going to let us add more pieces to our team. We're going to move on from some pieces. We're going to get to add some pieces. If you're a team that's been struggling and not getting the playoffs and had a bad season, this is your hope. The league is set up in a way to allow you to pick at the very top of the board. And there's a reason when you stack your board that player 12 is better than player 28, and depending on how you stack your board, that league is giving an opportunity to try and add better players that way. So it is a very exciting time. Draft day to me was always very, being in that room those 3 days was always I felt very calm. The chaos to me was getting to that point. It's the calmness is when you're actually sitting there and you're watching the picks come off the board, and then you're writing them down and you're thinking, man, Jacksonville just made a damn good pick. The Rams just made a damn good pick. Oh man, if I'm Carolina, I wouldn't have taken that guy. You just you could play that through your brain. But yeah, this is a very, very exciting time just because it gives you hope that you can make your team better, that maybe if you weren't very good, that you can be back to being good. And if you're really good, you can maybe get back to that Super Bowl like the Philadelphia Eagles will.
If Teterow McMillan is there at 12 and nothing like goes nuts or chaos between 1 and 12, is that who they pick? Is that who you think they pick, or somebody else?
I've been trying to put myself in their shoes, and I usually do that. I've evaluated 235 players, and I have my board up on 1053thefan.com. You can see the stack and how I saw them. I always try and put myself in Dallas's situation or any other team that, people, they're fans of other teams that ask me questions about players and stuff. So I always try and put myself in the situation of what they would do. Selfishly, we would absolutely love to for them to pick every single player that we like. It doesn't always work that way. So, yeah, if McMillan is there, I do believe McMillan would be the pick. I would be very interested to see, though, because there's been a lot of discussion about Matthew Golden. But if McMillan's not on that board, how close then is how close is Golden to, say, maybe a Buka from Ohio State? How close is it to maybe a Will Johnson, a corner from Michigan, or Tyler Booker, guard from Alabama? Where if my player is gone, where do the other players start to stack up? And I think that's the fascinating thing. I think if you're a Cowboy fan, You hope that McMillan, he could definitely come in. You asked me about positions, that wide receiver is clearly one of those. But I kind of feel like, though, that if we need to prepare ourselves, that if McMillan if he goes earlier in this draft, if he goes to the Raiders at 6, if he goes to the Saints at 9, that takes you out of the mix. Now you have to think about, okay, what next player are we going to select here? Because you always want to prepare for the absolute worst that could happen to you. If your player's gone, where are you going to be? Dallas experience that I mentioned with Ryan Shazier. Ryan Shazier off the board. Zach Martin was the next player. Boom. Potential Hall of Fame player right there. That because you were prepared, you were ready when your guy came off the board ahead of you. And so I think, to me, that, like you said, if McMillan is the guy, great. If he's not, then boy, this could be some fun dialogue that we have while Dallas is on the clock between a lot of different positions, the wide receivers, offensive linemen, defensive linemen, and then maybe a cornerback.
The Cowboys have had a lot of success, Brian, in offensive line drafting. And again, you see how sometimes someone might fall in your lap, or they move back and they get Frederick, unfortunately, because his career was cut short. But my God, Tyron Smith, Zach Martin, on and on and on. Why have they had so much success in the offensive line? And if they had to take one in the first round, based on what's available, you mentioned Booker at Alabama. Who else would be in that mix?
Yeah, I think that they've had some success. What's really strange now is this will be the third different offensive line coach that they've had to deal with. With Joe Philbin being gone, and then and then last year you had a new coach, and then now this year you got new coaches. Actually, you got a new offensive line coach, and then the offensive coordinator is a former offensive line coach. So they've thrown some resources to try and help this offensive line. I think those are the types of things that the linemen are like, wow, we got to learn, we got to understand, we got to, it's like starting all over again. I think Dallas has had some success over the years because they've had scouts that have an understanding of what these coaches want in particular players. I think that, Joe Philbin had a certain style of player he wanted. I think that Mike Solari had a different style of player that he wanted. We'll see with this new crew what the type of player, but they've done a really nice job of being able to marry what their offensive line coach and what they wanted scheme-wise to be able to do. You're looking at a group that this year they're talking about more outside running game, more the pin and pull, where you block down, and you get guys in space. Those are guys. Now, what you mentioned, Booker from Alabama, a bigger guy, more of a guy, but he can play in space. Is he as athletic as maybe Donovan Jackson is from Ohio State, who kicked out when Josh Simmons got hurt, he kicked from left guard to left tackle. Could that be a guy that could be in the mix there? So I think that they're kind of depending on the scheme. They're looking for particular guys, but they've done a really good job of being able to marry those particular traits of offensive linemen to their scheme, and it's helped them that way. But they've gone out, and let's be real honest about with Tyler Guyton in his situation. Will McClay made it a big point there. It was asked about the type of player, and players that love football, players that are committed, that kind of thing. And that's a new thing with NIL money, and how committed are players really to being their absolute best. And it's something that these scouts are going to have to deal with. Usually offensive linemen are very, very safe to pick because you could see how they play. You got a lot of them had made 25, 30 starts. Some of these guys, if you talk about majors at Texas, 50, 60 starts. So you could get an idea about these guys and how they play, unlike some of the other positions, and you can kind of get an idea how a guy works with other guys. Offensive line is really 5 guys being one. And so that's why I think they've had some success, because they've been able to marry, again, those guys, their ability, along with their ability to be able to work with other guys.
How do you measure talent with the motor that maybe doesn't seem to run very often? You hear a lot about Walter Nolan and others. How do you know?
That's terrifying. It really is. There's things that we used to be able to do. Nowadays we're not getting players to run all the drills. We're not getting a 40-yard dash, and we might not get a short shuttle, and we might not get a 3-cone. But yeah, the heart, the desire. I mean, you really have to be able to trust the people that have been with these players. And that's where scouting really, the relationships that you're able to build, that's where relationships come in. And I know that, say I go to Waco and talk to their coaches about their players. And, I have a coach that steps up to me and says, "Hey, Bryan, this guy, he's a hard guy to coach. He doesn't really, he doesn't really like football. He plays football because he wants to get through school, and he really doesn't, he's not a guy that's just totally committed, and when you start to hear those things, or you hear the total opposite, like, for example, Jalen Walker from Georgia, questions were asked about to his teammates at Georgia during the combine interviews of, if you could take a player along with you to the NFL, who would you take? And to a man, those teammates kept saying Jalen Walker. Jalen Walker's the guy I would take with me. So that kind of thing resonates with scouts. And it's really, really, really hard. The last couple of drafts, some of the things that might be the questions: does Mozzie Smith really, really love football? Is he really, really committed to football? He got better last year, but the first year he really wasn't good at football, and how committed was. And you look at Tyler Guyton, he didn't play a whole lot of football at Oklahoma. It's maybe the learning curve is a little steep there, but did he really, really love football? Is there some immaturity questions there? I think those are the types of things, when it happens to you, and it happens maybe back to back, that kind of changes your thinking a little bit about motor and heart and desire and how important it is to you. Because you do not want to draft a player that is just doing it because it's a job. You want somebody that's committed to trying getting better every single day. And that's a really, really hard thing to measure. You can watch it on tape and say, man, it doesn't look like he's really trying very hard here. And then you start to talk to the coaches and you're like, well, this guy doesn't. Or the guy's just, maybe the guy's not as good, not as talented skills-wise, but man, everything he's doing is at full speed. Maybe that's the kind of, and then the coaches tell you, well, this kid he's not the most talented guy, but he's, Terrence Steele is a great example of this, the right tackle for the Cowboys. Not the most talented guy, but when you start to hear about how he's first in line, he's first in the meetings, he's first in the weight room, you start to hear those things make up for guys that might not have as much talent.
A couple of questions more. And Bryan Broaddus, man, great to have you with us. I was able to get into one of those position coach scouts meetings when Baylor had a pro day like 10, 12 years ago.
Sure.
Gil Brandt got me in, the great Gil Brandt. And he said, I want you to listen to some of the questions. And coaches at that time, you got to have trust in the coach to tell you the truth. And there's a bunch of people in that room. How do you gain their trust and vice versa? Because if they don't tell you the truth, doesn't that, then you get soured on him or them?
Yeah. It's funny that you asked the question the way you did, because I could say, coaches to me are part of it. I personally, this is what I used to do. I would talk to equipment men or women now. I would talk to trainers, and I would talk to people who interact with the player, say in the dining hall. Right. Maybe you mosey into the dining hall and you ask a couple of questions. Maybe the folks that are running the dining hall, you say, hey, how does so-and-so treat players or treat staff in here? Oh, geez. What a great human being, always respectful. Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am. Thank you. Please. That type of guy. Great. Thank you. Talk to the equipment guys or the gals, and they'll tell you, man, this guy, he's messy. We have to get on him. He's not very good with the staff. He feels entitled. He's always wanting things. Or it could be the complete opposite. Sometimes coaches, like I say, when I was in that position as assistant recruiting coordinator at Texas A&M in 1990, where I had an interaction with pro scouts, and I tried to always be super honest about it. And you have to be careful, because you don't want it getting out that like, hey, but you have to really trust the guy or the gal you're talking to about. You have to trust them. Sometimes in group setting, you get somebody that's very, very honest about, hey, I wouldn't touch this guy. But that gets out. For example, we've got a situation right now with, there's been some reports about Shedeur Sanders, and NFL assistant coach said this, and man, that was both guns a-blazing there about Shedeur Sanders. You really don't want all that to get out. That's not something that's something you want to stay in a meeting. If you're a scout, you got that area, and I've got Baylor. We'll use Baylor as the example again. I got Baylor, and I go in there and say, hey, the coaches are telling me this. The equipment guys are telling me this. The trainers telling me this. And you kind of put all that together. But if you could talk to the people that these players interact with every single day on that level and get that kind of trust and confidence, and you could get them off on the side, and maybe not in a group setting, because sometimes in a group setting, you'll get some coach speak where, yeah, great kid, does everything we ask him to do. But then you talk to people away from that, and it's, I wouldn't draft this kid if it was me. He's not the type of guy. I mean, we're hopeful that he gets in the transfer portal and goes on. He is he's a hard guy to do. You have to build that trust. And like I say, by building the trust, you're not also talking to the media and saying, hey, well, when I was through Baylor, they had this kid. And then you start to go with the both guns blazing. That's not going to get it done.
How do you decipher what could be other teams putting things out because they're trying to help their own position? Somebody panics or they're trying to move up or down. There's some intel with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was more prevalent back in the day. I mean, we didn't have social media the way we do today. I think there was always things of deception. I think you have to be really careful of putting stuff out to try and manipulate. I think there's things that there's things you kind of keep to yourself. And if your guy's there, great. If he's not, then figure out the next guy. But like I say, it was a lot more back in the day. Today, I think it's a little, we have the avenues of being able to tell a beat writer like, hey, listen, I heard this guy's like just we talked about with Shedeur Sanders.
Sure.
That same coach might be in a position, that same coach might be at the Pittsburgh Steelers at 21 and they want Shedeur Sanders, and now they're putting out bad things about Shedeur Sanders to get everybody to talk about it. But it's the media that talks about it more than the scouting community. They know what the player is. What they're going to be, what's potentially could happen here though is they're messing with the wrong guy with Deion Sanders. You know what I'm saying? You want to be able to go into these universities and have a relationship. But if all of a sudden people are talking about players in that light, and especially that player with that coach, then things at Colorado for NFL teams going through there might be a little bit more difficult than what it was in the past.
Like a college program that has an offer to a player, he commits and then they pull the offer. They could be like nuked for at least as long as the head coach is still there. Bryan, last thing, you mentioned what it's like today. Did you get butterflies on the night of the draft or back in the day when it was on the weekend? What is that like? I know you've got full coverage on 105.3 The Fan this afternoon and then tonight and then through the weekend. Is there that sense of right before the game type butterflies, nervous, anxiety, whatever?
Yeah, it's funny you say that. One of my traditions that I used to do is that when we were in Green Bay, I always found something, and maybe it was just me, but I always found something that maybe the Pope had blessed or something, and I would tape that onto our draft board. I'd put that on up top on our draft board. So I was always looking for that divine intervention. But I would always stand there and look at the night before. I would always be the last guy in the room at the night before the draft. It might be midnight, just kind of making sure that we were buttoned up and ready to go. And then we had the candy dish all full of candy. My boss, Ron Wolf, at the time loved to eat Twizzlers, so I had to make sure I had Twizzlers in the thing. But I would look at those tags one last time, and I would just say, please, just start glowing. just glow, just for the Pro Bowlers, the All Pros, just glow. Just give me an idea up here who could play on this board and stuff like that. But yeah, you do. When the commissioner walks up to the podium and opens the draft, that's when he says, the 2025 NFL draft is now open, and on the clock that is the Tennessee Titans. That's when it hits you that for the next 18 hours, you've got to be just at your absolute best. And I think that's the challenge of it. And I think that's what makes it so exciting, that that you're about to go on this journey and you really have no idea where that journey is going to take you. You want to believe you've got a map, but you really don't have a map. It's up to all the other 31 teams that are with you in that, of how it all plays out. But it's such an exciting time. It's the adrenaline is I can only imagine, and I've been a part of a Super Bowl team and that in it, but the draft to me is one of those things that just, it could take your breath away, and then you kind of calm down, and then you're ready to go.
Bryan, you're the best, man. Thank you very much. I know it's a crazy busy 3 or 4 days, but always for you. Thanks for your time. We do appreciate it.
Thank you, Smokey. Great to be with you, sir.
Bryan Broaddus with us, 105.3 The Fan on 365 Sports.